are the called the female icons. And they are icons because they're idols. They're the maximum, the ultimate representative of this tradition. And we're talking about 4 of them, even and the most recent one as well. Lucha Reyes was born 1906 in Guadalajara, Jalisco. But at age 10, she moved to Mexico City, and she lived in the Tepito neighborhood. And Tepito never had a good reputation. It's kind of like the thieves' market. And it's El Bajo Barrio, but it's right next to Plaza Garibaldi, a couple blocks from the Mariachi Plaza. And that's where Lucha grew up. And when she was young, about 10, she started to sing in the choir, studied zarzuela, and at age 15, she went to a place like this, a carpa. It was like a tent that had a variety show, and won a singing contest, and that was really what started her career. People applauded her so much they immediately hired her. And she began studying with a German Jewish pianist named Isaac Goldenberg, who taught her music and music theory. Around 1920, Lucha traveled to Mexico City, where she sang in vaudeville and zarzuela programs. Zarzuela is Spanish opera, basically. In Los Angeles, she met this man, Gabriel Navarro, who was a well-known journalist, playwright, and they got married. However, the marriage was pretty much a disaster. And in 1924, she left Navarro, returning to Mexico. According to many, this marriage traumatized Lucha for life. Back in Mexico, she found considerable success in singing opera and even performed alongside this woman, the famous soprano Esperanza Iris, who was the diva of the day. In 1927, Lucha got invited by the Juan Torreblanca, leader of the Orquesta Típica Mexicana, to take a group to Germany. While they were in Germany, she participated in 8 recordings, 878 RPM sides, and on the Polydor label. The European tour was aborted, and everyone had to get back however they could. They had to sing in the streets and in bars to come up with enough money to get their earn their ticket back to Mexico. And they had to go on a third-class boat to make it back to Mexico, defeated. Her and the orchestra members. But in Europe, it was also a disaster because in Europe, she caught pneumonia, and it was wintertime. She lost her voice, and when she came back to Mexico, she was completely aphonic and couldn't sing for a year. And finally, when she got her voice back, it was damaged, and it was no good for singing opera anymore. Let's listen to her as Lucha in her facet as an opera singer. Sound mariachi at all, does it? But there is a link between bel canto and the Canción Ranchera. And one piece of evidence of this is Jorge Negrete. He sang opera before he sang ranchera music. Okay, when Lucha came back, when she realized she couldn't sing opera anymore, she formed a duet with this man, singer-guitarist Pepe Gutierrez, and they were together as a duet for almost 6 years. They made recordings, played a lot of live radio programs. Here's one of the recordings with Antonio Viesca on guitar.
Esa muy delgadita, tus pasiones me provocan. Tu cintura delgadita, tu nariz afiladita, y no te cambiaré por otra ya, que sea la más bonita.
Pepe Gutierrez was from Pihuamo, Jalisco, which is a neighboring town to Tecalitlan, where Silvestre Vargas was from. And he and Silvestre knew each other from way back. In 1934, Marchi Vargas was contracted to play for the inauguration ceremony of Lázaro Cárdenas as the president of Mexico. And he ran into Pepe Gutierrez. And Pepe introduced Mariachi Vargas to his singing partner, Lucha Reyes. Here they are in an early picture, recently arrived in Mexico, and the woman in the middle is Lucha Reyes. And they accompanied her regularly, but not yet on record. This is Silvestre Vargas with Lucha Reyes. Lucha performed and recorded with different mariachi groups and also with orchestras. Here she is with another unknown mariachi, playing probably on a live radio show. She recorded about 70 individual songs for the Victor label. There wasn't such a thing as a long playing record. People ask, well, how many LPs did she record? Well, she didn't record any per se. They were all single, two-sided 78 RPM records. And later they were assembled into LPs. Here's one of the early long-playing records. A lot of these records, so when the RCA Victor company wanted to issue an LP, they found themselves in a problem because the master recordings had been lost in a fire. And the only way they were able to do this was by transcribing 78 RPM records. And that's what we know today. Some of those 78s, by the way, have never been found. There's still recordings out there by Lucha Reyes that no one's ever heard, or few people have ever heard. Lucha recorded a total of 9 films. Her first big one was Ay Jalisco No Te Rajes, where she plays and sings alongside Jorge Negrete. This was an important film, La Tierra del Mariachi, for mariachi music because it introduced the mariachi music, the mariachi tradition to many people for the first time in the Spanish-speaking world. This was a big hit, huge hit here in Texas. It lasted for, I think for over a year. They played it on and off at different cinemas in San Antonio. I know, and because I found these newspaper articles. For many people, it was the first time they'd ever heard the word mariachi here in Texas, and even more so in Spain and in Central and South America. This was their original introduction to the tradition and the concept of mariachi. 1936. Lucha drank heavily. She always drank heavily. One of her favorite bars was El Gallo de Oro in downtown Mexico City, and she also drank in Garibaldi. And she was known to have many mariachi musician boyfriends. She hung around a lot with. She was a mariachera, and all of these. There's a lot of rumors about her liking women, but there's no credible evidence to support that. When she died at age 19, in 1944 of a barbiturate overdose, it left a void in ranchera music. The ranchera facet of Lucha's career was relatively short, only 16 years, but it had a long-lasting impact that still was felt today. One artist who helped fill that gap provisionally was Matilde Sanchez, better known as La Torcasita. But she never arose to the stardom of Lucha Reyes. neither did La Panchita, was also an excellent singer. She sang, one of her specialties was Peruvian waltzes, but she never ascended to Lucha's popularity. Today, there's a statue of Lucha Reyes at the Boyle Street Plaza in Los Angeles. There's still no statue of Lucha in Mexico. But she's really the mother of them all, as every singer will attest to. It wasn't until almost a decade later that another figure of the stature of Lucha Reyes, the popularity of Lucha Reyes came along, and that was Amalia Mendoza. Amalia has a very interesting story. She's from Huetamo in Michoacán. And when she grew up, their family was exceedingly poor. So poor, in fact, that they didn't live in a house. They lived in a cave that was an abandoned coal mine. That was where the Mendoza family grew up. And Amalia was still a baby. Her father was an itinerant musician who came and left, and one day he was out, he hadn't been back for weeks, and their mother decided to take the whole family to Mexico City, and that's about 250 miles. But they had no money for train ticket. So how do you think they got to Mexico City? That's it. They walked. They walked. But they didn't walk alone because it's kind of dangerous to make a trip by foot that far, and you'd have to go over mountains, and there were a lot of like highway robbers around at that time. So they tagged along with a cattle drive, and they walked along with the cattle and the cowboys for safety. It took them 23 days to walk from Huetama to Mexico City, 23-day journey. And Amalia was only 6 months old, so they carried her in arms the whole way. Anyway, she had 3 brothers, older brothers, and they formed a trio in Mexico City called the Trio Tariacuri, which became a real, one of the best known ranchera trios. Now today, when you say trio, we think of a romantic trio, in the style of Los Panchos. But this was a different type of trio. It was a trio ranchero, and they didn't play boleros. Boleros were not yet popular among mariachis. They played rancheras, corridos. They played, waltzes. What else would they play? Guapangos, and maybe sones, but definitely not boleros románticos. Anyway, they call themselves the Trio Tariacuri. Who knows what Tariacuri means? Where'd that word come from? Well, Tariacuri was a famous Indian chief from the Purepecha tribe. That was King Tariacuri. And so they adopted that name from the Indian leader of the region they were originally from. And they called themselves Trio Tariacuri. Amalia and her younger sister wanted to be like their older brothers, and they started their own trio. Some say they called it Las Tariacuritas. And that's Amalia, her younger sister, and another friend. But the sister didn't continue in music. And Amalia became a bolero singer. And she hooked up with Gabriel Ruiz, a very famous songwriter, pianist, and she became his favorite interpreter for romantic boleros. And one day on the radio, Ruben Fuentes heard her singing boleros, and he said, you should sing a ranchera, Canción ranchera. And he said, well, I don't know any rancheras, and I never sung rancheras before. And he picked one for her, and it was Puñalada Trapera. He convinced her to sing this live on the radio. and it became her first hit.
Estoy muriendo por tu culpa, por tu culpa. Si me engañabas con tu labia traicionera, la puñalada que me diste fue trapera. De esa se salva quien no tiene corazón. Qué mala forma de pegarle a un corazón.
That was her hit. Rubén Fuentes was artistic director of RCA Victor Records, and he got her signed to that label. She was always associated with Mariachi Vargas, and played with him frequently. Most of her recordings on the RCA label are with Mariachi Vargas. Okay, this is kind of gives you an overview of who the stars were at this time. And this would have been in the 1950s. You've got Lola, Amalia, Pedro, of course, Pedro Infante, Jorge Negrete, and Miguel Aceves Mejia, hugely famous, important artist. And then it has Norma Herrera on the right. Who knows who Norma Herrera is? Like she doesn't really fit in with that lineup, right? People say, well, Norma Herrera was the daughter of the photographer who took these pictures, who made this poster. And he stuck his daughter in there. she was starting to sing. She never became a famous singer, but she did a lot of telenovelas. I got to see Amalia Mendoza at the Teatro Blanquita in the late 70s, early 80s. And then Teatro Blanquita in Mexico City was the theater. If you were going to get into make a career as a singer, you had to cut your teeth. It was mandatory to perform at the Teatro Blanquita. And here she is with Vargas. I saw her a few years after this, and one thing I remember about Amalia is she cried. She was so emotional when she would literally, tears would stream down her eyes when she sang. That was a characteristic of her. And her gesture, she's very expressive. Here she is, later on, her brother, Juan Mendoza, got a duet, and they decided to make a series of records. And they called themselves Dueto Tariacuri.
Allá en el noroeste, entre Pilso y la Boquilla, se encontraban acampadas las fuerzas de Pancho Villa.
Well, those records were pretty good, and they sold well. Those were on the CBS label. But Rubén Fuentes was on the rival RCA label, so he said, hey, I'm going to outdo them. And he organized a recording session with Lola and Jose Alfredo Jimenez. And those actually sold better and were artistically more, I would say superior to the Dueto Tariacuri recording. So if you get a chance, listen to Amalia and Jose Alfredo. This is one of the great ranchera duets of all time. Amalia was famous for having these big skirts, as you can see. Very, very elegant. Here she is with Mariachi Vargas. She appeared in 8 different films, and the first part of her career was on RCA Victor Records, where she recorded over 300 songs. And these are some of the early albums. And then later, as other artists did during the end of her career when RCA didn't sign her. She wasn't one of the top-selling artists anymore. She switched to Discos Gas. And Discos Gas had kind of the reputation of singers that they still sang well, but they weren't in the limelight. They weren't in their prime anymore. They would record in Discos Gas. And some of those Discos Gas recordings are quite outstanding. They were made often with no overdubs, straight direct recording in the old style. And many of these were with mariachi virus. There's some incredible recordings on the Gas label, even though it was a budget label. Amalia never formally retired. She just kind of slowly reduced her number of performances, and finally, eventually died in 2001. Today, there's a statue of her in the entrance to her hometown, Huetamo, Jalisco, and the man who's standing there, who gave me this photo, is Juan Mendoza Jr., an excellent singer. I hope you all get a chance to hear Juan Mendoza sing. Truly extraordinary ranchera singer. Well, by the 50s, other artists came along, nuevos valores, as they call them. One was Flor Silvestre, who started like in 49. She later married Antonio Aguilar. And then a year later, in 51, her sister, La Prieta Linda, made her debut. And then there's another, in 53, this girl, La Consentida, who was a child prodigy, made a lot of records from a very early age. And we have to mention La María de Lourdes, La Embajadora, they call her. She was extremely popular and influential, and took mariachi music all around the world. She went to many countries of the world, which earned, with the mariachi, promoting Mexican music, which earned her the title as La Embajadora de la Canción Ranchera. Lucha Moreno was very, you probably never heard of her much these days, but she was an outstanding singer, and she sang lots of sones jaliscienses. Look her up, you can hear her on YouTube. Well, the next female superstar to come along was Lola Beltran, who was born in 1932 in El Rosario, Michoacán. It's not Michoacán, it's Sinaloa, right? Yeah. There's Lola and Amalia together when they were both young. And they were big. Lola, they call Lola La Grande. She was pretty tall. So was Lucha Villa, was pretty tall. They called them both Las Grandes. Well, in 1953, she got Lola Beltran got a job. She moved from her hometown to Mexico City, and got a job as a secretary for Amado C. Guzman, who was the artistic director of the radio station. And XEW. Keep in mind that back then, today we assume the radio plays records, right? Plays recordings. Well, back then there was more live music on the radio, live programs than there were records being played. And Lola, being the secretary, she would get in, see if she could get in these amateur hour contests whenever she could, and that's how she got discovered. She had an inroad. Here, of the 500 or so songs she recorded, the first 300 were on the Peerless label. Peerless label soon took note of her and signed her. Here's some of her earlier albums. One of her her song, her trademarks was one of her main composers, songwriters that wrote for her, was Tomás Méndez, who had a lot of songs about doves. So you see the imagery of the dove. There's Cucurucu, Paloma, Paloma déjame ir, Paloma Negra, and other Paloma songs that alluded to the dove. And then that became identified with Lola. She was the first female ranchera singer to perform in the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. And in 1984, she actually had her own, for over a year, she had her own television. She was also the announcer, the host of a program called Noches Tapatías. So she did a lot of things. She had a lot of influence during her career. Lola continued to perform through the 1990s up until her death in 2001. She's the only ranchera artist. Most ranchera singers, if they have one statue to them, they're fortunate. Lola has 3. Actually, that's how it gives you an idea of her importance to Mexican music. This one's in Plaza Garibaldi. There's another one in Mazatlán, Sinaloa, and in Rosario, Sinaloa, another statue. 3 statues to her. So she, probably of all the singers we're talking about, she was the one who was most influential, Lola Beltrán. But another generation always comes along, and the next female superstar of ranchera music was Lucha Villa, who was born in Chihuahua, from Santa Rosalia de Camargo, Sinaloa. Today known just as Camargo. Lucha, earlier in her career, got signed to the Musart label. They one of the early Mexican national labels, and she's the only one who stayed with that one label, with the same label from start to finish. She was always a Musart artist. Here we have her. Back then, the record companies would organize live radio programs to promote their artists, their exclusive artists. And here's one with Lucha. Okay, who are these people with Lucha Villa? Who can name these? Miguel Aceves Mejia. Who's the other man? Javier Solis. You know, giants of the Canción Ranchera. This is a classic photograph. In 1964, Lucha got invited to participate in an exceptional Mexican movie, which we'll talk more about, called El Gallo de Oro.
Aquí está mi gallo de oro, que ya le han ganado al giro, con quien lo pongan al tiro, rifará su corazón.
This is one of the best Mexican films you'll ever see, in my opinion. The original, it was based on a book written by Juan Rulfo, who's a costumbrista. He wrote a lot about the traditions and customs of Jalisco. And the screenplay was adapted by 2 of the greatest Spanish language writers in the world. Colombian, the Nobel laureate, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and a famous Mexican author, Carlos Fuentes, Casi Nadie, right? They wrote the screenplay, believe it or not. Here, there. And one of the main actors is Ignacio Lopez Tarso, who the famous corrido specialist. He's a star in his own right, television person. And to do the music, they got no one less than Rubén Fuentes. And accompanied, and all of the soundtrack was done by Marichi Vargas. So if you get a chance, see that movie, El Gallo de Oro. Well, Lucha had studied acting, and of all the other, the female ranchera singers we're going to talk about today, Lucha was the one who was the most successful as an actress. She made over 70 films and performed in different theater works, musicals, and telenovelas. Here's one. Oh, by the way, like Lucha, in case you want to ask, Lucha was a sex bomb. That was part of her identity, you know. She was really sexy, sensual person, as you can see in this depiction. She, here she is in a theater musical that was done by Rubén Fuentes and had Mariachi Vargas, called Y de Todos Modos. And sure, that was successful, and it was followed by a tradition, a series of concerts every year in el Teatro de la Ciudad de Mexico. They must have had that for 7 or 8, 10 years. Every year, Lucha would be for a solid week in el Teatro de la Ciudad. And in the 1980s, I lived in Mexico City, and I would try to attend all those rehearsals, sneak into all those rehearsals and the concerts, every one I could, because to this day, it's the greatest ranchera music I've ever heard, right? The highest expression of mariachi music, artistically, that I've ever seen in person, was that. They'll show an album. There's a double album. You can hear it on YouTube. Actually, I took this snapshot at one of those concerts with Mario Santiago singing with Lucha. Unfortunately, Lucha, yeah, she drank tequila and all that, but that wasn't really her downfall. Was more related to her weight. You know, she'd always had trouble with being too heavy. And she met, in 1997, she met a Brazilian doctor who performed liposuction. And he convinced her that, you know, the solution to all her problem was have this liposuction operation, and you'll be skinny for life, and this will be, you know, and you'll be back singing in no time. Well, the guy turned out to be a quack. I think they took his license away, but in the case of Lucha, the operation was a disaster. And she went into a coma during the surgery. The anesthesia went bad. It starved her oxygen for brain. She was in a coma for 3 days. And when she finally awoke from the coma, she could barely speak. And it just destroyed part of her brain. And that was the end of her singing career. Lucha is still alive. But this is what she looks like today. And she can only speak a few words. She can't even construct full sentences. Pobrecita de Lucha. So that's a real sad, it's tragedy. Sad story of what happened to Lucha Villa. In her hometown of Camargo, they erected this statue, and look what she has in her hand, El Gallo de Oro. You know, and, referring to that famous movie that she made. You'll always be identified with her. While these three singers were alive, Juan Gabriel got this great idea to put together a production called Las Tres Señoras. It's actually, there's more than three. And he wanted to get these three living singers and get them to perform together while they were still alive and while they were still able to perform. He also got some other females like La Hermanas Padilla to do their final recording. I think with Las Hermanas Huerta are in there. But the main one, these are the main ones, Lola, Amalia, and Lucha. A lot of you probably heard this. Many of you performed this. Some mariachis have performed this at festival. My friend Rigoberto Gomez was the mariachi director for Juan Gabriel at the time. And Juan Gabriel put him in charge of organizing this. And he said it was really difficult because he could never get the three singers together in one place. Personally, he had to figure out their keys and construct their parts, compose their parts, and then record them, teach them their parts, have them record it individually with a click track, and then put it all together and make it sound like they were in one room. And he said it was quite a task. You know, he had to go to different parts of the country to see them. They later on, all three of the women did get together with one guy. But this was a formidable project that was the brainchild of Juan Gabriel. There was originally supposed to be a sequel album to this that was called Los Tres Señores, with Miguel Aceves, Luis Aguilar, and Antonio Aguilar. And Miguel Aceves and Antonio did record some fragments for the Los Tres Señores record, but it was too late in their career. They were too old. Luis Aguilar couldn't sing anymore, so this record never got made. The final person we're going to talk to about here is Aida Cuevas, whom you're all going to hear tomorrow night. How many of you are going to hear Aida Cuevas? I assume you're all going, right? You better not miss it. She is the current reina of the música ranchera. Dalia was saying, that I was in Garibaldi. I went to Mexico City and was there. Well, that's true. In the late 1970s, I went to Mexico City, and I got hired by a group called Mariachi de Silvestre Vargas Jr. And we were playing at a place called Santa Cecilia. Plaza Santa Cecilia was a nightclub. And one day they said, okay, we're gonna accompany this girl. This young girl is making her debut, and we gotta accompany her. And it was Aida Cuevas. It was unbelievable. And she was just, they announced her, La Niña de 14 años. And who would know that 50 years later, she would still be singing and become an icon in her own right. This is about the time, what she looked like around the time I accompanied her. That's how young she was. And this is some of her biggest hits, most influential recordings were the ones she made with Juan Gabriel, of his songs. So Aida, they call her La Reina de la Canción Ranchera, and I think she totally deserves that title. She's earned it. This year, she celebrates 50 years in Ranchera, of her cultural legacy. Of 50 years of continuous singing. Here we see the relative careers of the different singers. The only one that outdoes her, I think, is Aida's been there 50 years. This year she marks 50 years. I think Amalia's career lasted 55 years. So. Aida's catching up with her. Here's another comparison. Lucha Reyes only recorded 70 songs. Amalia 310. Lola 390. Lucha 499. And Aida Cuevas 500. Approximately 500 songs. As far as movies, like I spoke before, Lucha 9, Amalia 5, Lola Beltran 41, but the actress of the five is definitely Lucha Villa with 72 films. Aida Cuevas only 5, but we're in a different era. You got to keep in mind that at the time of Lucha of the other 4, they were every week they were filming ranchera movies every single week. Sometimes it was just continuous. There were ranchera production. There would be at least 20 ranchera films every year coming out. Now, today there's maybe one every few years. So I don't think Aida's ever going to catch up with her, contemporary predecessors. Okay, I got to find a question for you. Aida, I asked Aida, I saw her in San Jose, California last week, and I said, Aida, when you finally, retire, who's going to take over? Who's going to be the next ídolo, who's going to be the next queen of ranchera music. And she said, well, you know, and then her brother, her son said, oh, my sister, and that's her sister. That's Rodrigo's sister. Aida, that's Aida and her daughter, Valeria. And Aida said, no, he said, my daughter, yeah, she started out real well, but she's decided she doesn't want to be a ranchera singer. That's not what she wants to do as a career. So anyway, to let you all know, who do you think is going to be the next icon of ranchera singing, the next queen of the Canción ranchera? Maybe it's one of you out here. Who you think? ¿Quién? Naradi Zapata. Okay, and there's some others that have been proposed. At the last performance, other people, there's some thought that they're compañeras, you know, are a possibility. You never know. When I accompanied Aida when she was 14 years old, who would have guessed that she would become one of the queens of ranchera music, and that 50 years later she would still have a career and you know, 40, 50 albums recorded. So this kind of gives you a comparison of the characteristics, the qualities, the production, the contribution of these 5 singers. And you're going to get to see Aida in person tomorrow night. And hopefully some of this will give you an orientation, will help you to better appreciate Aida Cuevas and just ranchera music in general, and the female contribution to ranchera music, which is extremely important. So I think we're going to you know, dismiss you, but does anybody have any questions on what we've talked about? Nadie tiene preguntas. Nobody has any questions on any of this. Okay, did most of you know these? Did you know any of this information already about these singers? You must have known some of them. Not too much. You know, it's not that widely available, honestly. And I think we should give applause to Dr. Dalia Guerra, who had the vision to put. Dr. Guerra is the one who put this together, and she said, well, you know, I want you to speak about the career of these 4 artists. I said, Dalia, I'm not the one. I'm not the right person for this. It should be a woman to do it. A woman should no. And she said, no. I think you're the right person to do it. So thank you. Here she is. Let's give her another applause. The one who had the inspiration to do this presentation. Okay, well, thank you again for your attention and all your enthusiasm. And enjoy the festival and enjoy Aida Cuevas tomorrow night.
Another big hand for Jonathan Clark. Thank you. We're going to hear some amazing singing in a little while at 4 o'clock, and goes on till about 9, and then there's these beautiful trophies to be given out. Actually, the trophies are for tomorrow. The medals are for today, and Aida Cuevas tomorrow night. So this is a weekend to remember, memorable. Thank you all for being here, and enjoy the competition. It starts at 4. You all have a wristband. You can go in and out as you please. And that wristband also gets you in to the seating for the Aida Cuevas concert. Thank you. Big hand for you all.